Anin, Sagoli, Kiakulamalsi. Welcome, Wache in my language. My name is Candace Burnett de Bossige. I'm a Cree woman from Pitabec, Treaty 9 territory, and it's such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm sitting here in Museum London, this fabulous place in London, close to downtown, and I'm looking over our beautiful Deshgon Zibing, um, that historic place, that place that's called the Fork of the Thames here in London. With deep respect, I just want to take a moment to gather us all here today. Thank you for coming and sitting with us to hear from Leanne Bettamosge Simpson. It's such an honor to be sharing space with you today, Leanne. I am a huge fan. This is probably on my bucket list, I have to confess. I know we're not physically together, but we're getting to share space, cyberspace, if you will. So that's pretty cool. For those of you who don't know Leanne, and I can't imagine anyone coming today who hasn't heard of Leanne. Leanne is a renowned writer, musician, artist, and scholar. She's from Michi-Sagig, Nishnabeg, and her work really crosses a lot of genres. And it was hard for me to even come up with how to describe her work. And I think to even put it in a category would be disrespectful and limit how we experience what she brings to the world and her brilliance. So I hesitated with that. I want to say before I invite Leanne to, say a few words and read from her latest book, Newfoundland, is Leanne. I have such a deep respect for your work, for your artistic choices, for your career choices. I have to say I've been following you since the '90s. You your choices give us as Anishinaabe people courage to reclaim our knowledge and our stories. And your sense of being vulnerable in your work has really spoke to me. This piece of writing that I had such a privilege to sit with over the last few days comes at a perfect time for me. It was a piece of you spoke to my soul, my spirit, and it was like medicine. So I want to just thank you because I really needed that right now. I'm in this transition in my life where I'm going to be shifting and I'm really reflecting. And I guess with everything that's going on in the world, the physical disconnection, the not being able to gather collectively together physically has been weighing on me. And I found hope in your piece. I found hope in the stories of just trying to reconnect amidst the most um, unexpected places. And I really I needed that hope right now. So I just want to thank you so much for this for this gift that you bring to us. So welcome, Leanne.
No, miigwech for those kind words. Ani Kinawaya, everyone. It's so amazing to be here. I wish I could see the river. I wish I had your view. But I'm really happy to be in conversation with you, Candace. I feel like hearing that my work was medicine for you and that it brought you hope. I feel like that just fills me up. There's no better success or recognition than that. So that's thank you for saying that. And I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to visit with you all.
So before I get into all sorts of questions, and I have so many, I would like to just give you the opportunity to share whatever section or piece of your writing that you want to start us off with, just to put that out there into the world. Hopefully others
Sure.
will appreciate that too.
I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book, a piece called Solidification. This is a piece that sort of starts off the book in a gentle way, in a way that's, I think, full of humility. And it introduces the reader to the 7 main characters in Mashkwaje, the narrator. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was wondering how this book was going to travel through the world. because so many of the normal venues for releasing a book, like literary festivals and bookstores and book launches, were being canceled, and we hadn't sort of rallied yet as a literary community and figured out how to do this. And so in that time, I worked with my sister, Ansley Simpson, who's a singer-songwriter from Toronto, and we released an EP on Bandcamp called Dopamine Sessions. That's 4 readings. And this was one of the tracks, Solidification. Later on in the summer, we were able to connect with a visual artist and filmmaker, Sammy Cheon, and the Chimeric Collective from North Vancouver, and make a video. So I'm going to read the acapella version of this today, but if folks want to check out the video and the music, you'll be able to find it on Bandcamp on YouTube. Once you move through cold, there is Pacific. Once you move through Pacific, there is placid. Once you move through placid, there is a condition of expanse. And it was in that condition of expanse that held me. I heard them singing above me. Mashkawaje fell through the ice to find quiet, to get out of the wind, to visit with Namegos. They all sang. Mashkawaje stitches up the hole. They are so cold they can't move. They are frozen stiff. The lake is their blanket. They all sang, Mashkawaje is frozen stiff, still, calm. No one knows if they're coming back. They all sang, Akewenze is fishing through the ice with a spear. They brought a line of beads. They will wait patiently. They will wait until Mashkawaje is done their visit. The singing and drumming came every night from a distance. Different choirs every evening at dusk, marking the passage of time, reminding me there is still love. You see, tragedy happened again. The details don't matter because the details are hopeless, overwhelmed, shut down. Know this, after 2 years, the best parts of me are still frozen in the lake. My limbic system, its best friend, the prefrontal cortex, and the hollow pumping organ in which I keep benevolence. The only one that regularly comes to visit is Akewenze. In the winter, they park their truck on the ice, drill a hole with the auger, and fish until the cold makes their bones crack. As soon as the ice is off the lake, Akewenze is back in their boat with a torch and a sort of pitchfork for spearing pickerel. In the dead of summer, Akewenze sneaks back before first light in their canoe, before the cottagers and their jet skis are out. In the fall, they sprinkle tobacco around me and sing. My world is muted. I look out. If something upsets me, I just wait and the upset passes. I sit beside. Sometimes I remember the other me before I was frozen in the lake. I remember caring and engaging and the sharpness of unmuted feeling. I remember hopeless connection. I don't feel stuck, in part because I don't feel anything. Their song isn't wrong. The ice is like a warm, weighted blanket. My form dissolved when tragedy came, and if I am fluid, the ice is container. There are ashes in my eyes. I am so far inside myself, like Miss Squadesi on a full fast inside time, pulled inside their organs, inside their turtle shell, inside the sediments of the lake, while the ice world forms on top, oblivious to the outside, with body as lake. And they are soulless in being cut off, and there is freedom enmeshed within that state. Know this, being frozen in the lake is another kind of life. Know this, it is unclear how long before I will be done with my visit. It's unclear how long visiting takes. Know this, visiting is more of a dance than an event. Akewenze is my will, Nanotic is my lungs, Mindamoya is my conscience. Sabe is my marrow. A dick is my nervous system. A sin is my eyes and ears. Lucy is my brain. I believe everything these seven say because ice distorts perception and trust replaces critique, examination, interrogation. I believe everything these seven say, even though. I believe everything these seven say, even though their truths are their own, not mine. I believe in the absence of my own heart, I will accept the hearts of these seven. The geese fly overhead in the sheer grace of a carefully angled formation designed to take them elsewhere. There are still stars. There are still stars.
Miigwech, every time I hear that, I see something new. It's just amazing. Such tenderness, such interconnection. I'm wondering, if you can talk to us a little bit about the driving force behind writing this piece. When you think, what compelled you, and what was, what's the purpose, if you were to sum it up?
I think that one of the starting points for this book was just this idea that it's a miracle that you and I are still here after 4 centuries of violence and dispossession. And I wanted to celebrate that a little bit because I think that's a miracle. And it's a result of a lot of really, really hard work by our families and our ancestors. And so I wanted this book to be a really kind of beautiful Anishinaabe place where there was a lot of joy, where I was sort of acknowledging the trauma that's a part of all of our lives and that's a driving force in colonialism, but sort of push it to the margins a little bit, just allude to it, and then build this other world. I think that Indigenous people are really great at building worlds on top of worlds, in between worlds, in the interstitial spaces with whatever we have as a practice. And so I wanted things like this deep relationality that is so important to many Indigenous societies to be really present in the book and to show us being connected relationally to trees, to caribou, to each other, and to the water and to the land. I wanted to have a really strong sense of presence because I think what we do right now, what we do in the present is planting seeds for that future. I wanted to sort of give a nod to that resistance and hard work of our ancestors and our elders and those ones that have come before us. And I wanted to give, first of all, Indigenous and Anishinaabe readers some space to laugh and to find joy and to find care and tenderness and to have an experience of reading that was maybe just a space of joy or peace or kind of solace. So I wanted to really sink into those ideas, and I was really thinking a lot about audience when I was writing the book. I was really thinking about Anishinaabe storytelling and how important that is to our people and to our intellectual and our artistic traditions. I was thinking about how our storytellers are so great at layering meaning. So that every time you hear a song or a story or one of our prayers, because we repeat things so often, but every time you hear that, because there's so many layered meanings, you learn something new. So I sort of wanted it to be a layer of a recognition for Indigenous people and a place almost.
I definitely felt like you were talking to Anishinaabe people or Anishinaabe people. I see Cree people as part of that larger Anishinaabe family. So I definitely, felt that you were speaking to us. And there was these little almost inside jokes that I wondered if everybody got, but it didn't matter. I wanted to talk a little bit about structure. I talked about your, difficulty kind of putting you into a category or, putting your style into a category necessarily. But I'm really curious about how, what your choices were with the form of this book and like your use of space and like the structure and flow of it. I, Anything you can offer on that, I'm very interested.
Yeah, and so I think that this book is written for Anishinaabe people first, but not exclusively. So I see that sort of expanding audience where I hope that more than just Anishinaabe, more than just Indigenous people can see themselves in it. I really didn't. I wanted to layer in those sort of um, places, inside jokes, or places where Indigenous people or racialized people or Black people would feel seen and affirmed. And I also didn't want to, in the editorial process, I wanted um, that part of it to stand on its own. I didn't want to have a comma where then I explained the joke, because that's such a way of telling Indigenous people or racialized people that this book isn't actually written for you. And I thought that sort of taking that approach sort of raises the bar. And I think that non-Indigenous audiences and white audiences are fine with that. Um, the structure is really different than the Western literary tradition of writing a novel, and part of that is accidental because I did set out to write a longer form, but my background is in Anishinaabe oral tradition. I didn't go to writing school. That form of writing a novel with the protagonist and the antagonist and the tension and the themes is really, really Western and really foreign to me. And it was something that I just couldn't do. And so I felt like in a story where you're building a world, I need all of the tools available to me. I need my language. I need our intellectual traditions and our cultural practices. I need our aesthetics and our theory. I need poetry. I need prose. I need song. I need everything. And that's also kind of a centering of Indigenous creative practice, because if you're out on the land and you're making wild rice, all of those things happen over the course of it, or you're doing a sweat lodge, or you're making a feast. All of those things culturally will happen over the course of an event. And so I thought that at least my first audience wouldn't have, and that wouldn't be an issue for us, because we're used to not fitting into the academy, or we're used to not fitting into the literary community. We're used to our way of thinking and expressing ourselves, not fitting into these Western structures.
Hmm. I'm also I wanted to talk a little bit with you about. I noticed your, I guess it was a commitment to really not falling into the gender binary. And I've seen this in your work before, and I really noticed that this time it was, throughout the entire book, you really used they almost always, except for a few times.
Yeah.
And as a cisgender Indigenous woman, I noticed myself, wanting to. I was rereading. I'm trying to figure out who you were talking about, what characters you were talking about in certain times, and then I started at one point later on thinking, why do I need to put this in a category? And I started to really see that in myself. And it was a kind, because you were so committed to it throughout the whole book, towards the end, it started to reveal my own bias, I guess, and my own desire for that category. I thought, wow, that's really deep. Um, can you talk to us about your thinking behind that and why you didn't use it in certain cases? I'm curious.
That was exactly the reading experience. I thought a lot about the reading experience. That was exactly the reading experience that I wanted readers to have, but it was also part of the writing experience. I was also confronting those deep biases in myself. And so I have written kind of academically about how this gender binary is something that has been imposed on an Anishinaabe society, that we had more than two genders, that there was a diversity of sexual orientations and relationship orientations, and that queerness was just normal. So in this world that I was building in Nopaming, I as an academic, we're always like, we're telling and critiquing. And then as a writer, I was like, well, I'm just going to build this world. I'm going to see what happens when I don't ascribe a gender. And my brain would also wanted gender in certain characters. And so that was a challenge. That was those questions I went through. Like, why does this have to be? What if I take this gender out? Does this character work as gender nonconforming? Does it work in all of the different kind of gender categorizations? I wanted also readers of all genders to be able to insert themselves in the story and see themselves in the story. So I wanted it to be inclusive, or as inclusive as possible. And I wanted that to be normal. So I think that there's so many young, emerging, queer, trans, Indigenous writers right now that are doing all kinds of work that is really beyond what I was trying to do here. My main purpose was just to have readers be able to see themselves and not feel excluded in the story, and to have that queerness presented as normal.
Another thing I noticed that you did, you referenced time, you referenced prices on things, like the cost of things and the weight of things throughout the book repetitiously, which I thought, oh, is that like akin to the oral, that sense of orality that we see? But you're talking about how much tarps cost and how much art catalogs cost, or repurposed, which I got a kick out of, backpacks on Kijiji, because I'm a big Kijiji shopper, by the way. And then Nindamoyans being so obsessed with bargoons.
Yeah.
I thought she was just a fabulous character, by the way. I really loved her. She reminded me of my mother-in-law, I have to confess. But I wondered what your choices were there, and if that was deliberate, and what you were thinking of when you were doing that.
Over the course of my professional life, I've spent a lot of time with elders, and I've spent a lot of time interviewing with elders. And that's one thing that when they're talking about the past, they will talk about what flour costs, what sugar costs, what gas cost, the price of furs. They talk about the economy because they grew up in poverty and they lived in poverty. And that was something that they had to pay very careful attention to, the wage labor and how much things cost. And so I can see that. I see that in my own family. I see this frugalness and thriftiness as part of a deeper kind of Anishinaabe culture. Take only what you need, use everything that you take, don't waste things, reuse things, repurpose things. It's part of a way of living in the world that I actually think is something that I should adopt a bit more. And that like it's sort of a profound way of thinking about the world, particularly when I look at how in my life it's very easy for me not to make anything, not to repurpose anything, not to save anything, but to just buy things and consume things. So it's also sort of a critique of capitalism and modern life, where it's easier to order it on Amazon than to try to repair it. And it's that it's sort of an honoring of that last generation that spent so much time thinking about prices and shopping for bargains.
I had to laugh at the Dr. Ho, and not only the Dr. Ho, because we know that those infomercials that we see, those late night infomercials, I think they do make their way into our communities. But it's wrapped in plastic. That just cracked me up. I really loved that character. I mean, I loved all the characters. I could really feel people in them, like people that I knew or that I know and love. There were so many moments, but I wanted to talk about geese, because I can't talk to you without talking about geese. I'm totally being a Cree woman, obsessed with geese, and anyone who knows me knows that, and I gravitate to a lot of your work because you tend to pay homage to the geese. I know you I noticed that about some of your work, and I felt like you really did it in this one. It was beautiful. Um, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit. It's weaved in there throughout, but it's so beautiful.
I also really fascinated and in love with geese. And they're one of our relatives that are very present, whether you're living on the reserve, whether you're living in the bush, or whether you're living in downtown Toronto. That nation, that formation, those relatives are there. And so I wanted, we talk a lot about the impact of colonialism on us as Indigenous people, and I wanted to shift the focus a little bit and think about what it's done to nations and living things like geese, like raccoons, some of these relations that live inside our cities and live inside our urban spaces and still behave sort of responsibly and ethically according to kind of goose culture. And geese do some pretty amazing things in terms of flying in formation, in terms of migrating, in terms of this split between the geese now that stay in the southern parts of Canada all year round. I started thinking about geese because I was out a couple of falls ago with Doug Williams from Curve Lake. We were hunting and a flock of geese flew overhead. And he said, "Oh, those are migrating geese, not the geese that stay around Peterborough." And I said, "How do you know?" And he said, "Well, I can tell from the honk because it's the same honk that I've heard my whole life." And I was like, whoa, that's amazing. And so in thinking of what it's like to be an urban Indigenous person and living in the city and trying, that ache that we have for connection and belonging and culture, I wanted to really focus on things that were here, things that I could see in my daily life. And the geese was one of those things.
Yeah, geese get a bad rap. Especially in the city, like people just don't understand. For Cree people, there are stories that tell us that they saved us during famines, during major famines, and I just have such a deep respect, for geese, and when people call them nasty things, it gets me really upset. I work at a university. And you talked about the university, the academy. You referenced these things. I noticed you made references about the absurdity, and I thought this was really true. It was piercingly true about Akwenzi and the pile of corporate paraphernalia that are given as payments to our elders. I thought that was, and you mentioned some other things about the academy. I'm wondering if you can talk to us about your thoughts there.
I think part of it is because I sort of am on the margins of the academy because there's a lot of Indigenous folks in the academy. There's been a big increase in the last 20 years. There's a lot of people coming to the city to go to these institutions. So that's part of why I think it's in the story. The other reason is I think that Indigenous people, even if you're from a pretty remote community, there's always stories and histories of anthropologists coming up or researchers coming up, or that's part of our oral tradition, this idea of being studied. What's more new is for us entering the academy and jumping through the hoops and getting the credentials and becoming the experts to some people, because generally in our communities, just because we went to school and got a PhD, we are not the expert, and people don't have any problem reminding us of that. And I love that. That's wonderful. So there's lots of kind of cultural clashes that happen at the university, like right from you would never, as an Anishinaabe person, write down a document bragging about everything that you'd ever done in your whole life. And, you know, the CV or a resume is such a, like, you have to do that in the academy to get a grant or to get a promotion or to get a job. So there's all kinds of things that I think are really useful in terms of literature, and funny, and not funny when you're like, when you're a student for sure, or when you're kind of pushing back against that in your daily life as part of these institutions. Um, but it just became a kind of an interesting literary device. And it's also, I wanted in this book to have different generations interacting. And so you have younger folks that might be at the university, but our elders are also asked quite a lot to do the opening prayer, the land acknowledgement. We give them the mug or the reusable shopping bag that goes back into their houses, into the piles of stuff they've accumulated. Um, and yeah, there's a satirical nature to some of this book and some of the humor in this book that is a way of rethinking some of the practices that we are engaging in.
Yeah, I felt like that I could feel that. Some of those commentaries, those absurdities, those political absurdities, I had kind of thought of before too, and it's just like, yeah, it's a pretty messed up world sometimes when we think about it. Let's talk a little bit about your choice of Nanotic. I know this is not the first time you have Nanotic. Like it's continuous in a lot of your work, but I felt really connected in to Nanotic in a new way because of the perspective that you brought. Just that consoling nature of Nanotic and that ever-giving nature really came through for me. Can you talk to us about Nanotic?
Nanotic is a maple tree, and that's definitely been a theme in my work now for a number of years. And I keep thinking that I'm done with it, and then I'm not, because it grows. My relationship, I guess, with the sugar bush and with maple trees deepens, and something else is revealed. And so I think that character started with a poem and with a song, "The Oldest Tree in the World." There's a park in Peterborough, a kind of a fragment of old growth forest, and it's got some very, very old maples. And over a period of time, I was visiting this oldest maple in the world, and I was thinking about this maple is over 400 years old. I was thinking about what that relative of mine had witnessed, what they had seen, how the world had changed. Does the air taste different? And in this book, I just wanted to develop that character more. I fell in love with Nanotic, and I wanted to create a deeper connection in it, and have the other characters in this book have a deeper relationship as sort of an elder character that travels, that's participated in the ceremony of being tapped and sharing sap for making maple syrup or making maple sugar, that has a shopping cart where they keep their special things. And also, this is a character. This is a being, a living being, that if you live in downtown Toronto or London, you can find, a maple tree. And so I think all of the characters in this book I really fell in love with. And some of them started like Sabe, started in Islands of Decolonial Love, and then I was not able to let Sabe go, and so they appear in this Accident of Being Lost. And then this book is just a deepening of some of those characters with new characters as well. But I wanted to, again, shift that focus from just human to plants and trees, and then of course the caribou character, Dick, and the geese and the raccoons, sort of kind of broaden this world and think about when Anishinaabe people build a nation or build a world, we're not talking about a settler state. We're not talking about an enclosed space. We're talking about a series of complex relationships with humans, with plants, with animals, with water, with land, that's expansive and crosses time and space. And so it made sense to have one of the elders in the book be this old maple tree.
Hmm. I really loved when you talked about Nanotic piercing and giving its flesh. Like that's what happens every spring in the sugar bush. It it really I guess resonated with me. Your perspective and how it shifted my perspective. Um, you talked about Nanotic can feel them moving their roots out from out of the way as they stretch into the soil so that Nanotic is grounded and hydrated. Nanotic longs for the gentle sway of everyone's branches in unison when Newton shows up. There were these moments, I could feel Nanotic in a way that I had not felt Nanotic before. So, miigwech for that. Um, you use um, ethylene a lot. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because you do talk about the petroglyphs in 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 Peterborough, close to Peterborough, and Akuenzi spends a lot of time, you know, going sneaking in, which I thought was interesting, and carving the C2H4. I thought that was um, surprising, but then I really had to kind of sit with that and try to understand what you were saying.
So yeah, so there's the Petroglyph site north of Peterborough is now a provincial park. It's a sacred site for Anishinaabe people, and a lot of different Indigenous people travel to that site. It's a place where my people and where I've actually gone to fast and do ceremony. And it's a site. It's one of the sites of creation, and so it's a very, very special site to us. People will go there and dream, and then record their dreams by etching them into the rock. When it became a provincial park, under Mike Harris, they built a building on top of those petroglyphs in order to preserve the site. And they did that without consulting or the consent of First Nations. And in the process of building that, they shut off one of the kind of underground creeks. And that creek was really important because it had this bubbling kind of sound where you could talk to your ancestors. So they sort of ruined the most important part of the site. So to get there, some of our elders have keys, and over the years, the communities have developed a better relationship with the park, for sure. And it's possible to go there and do ceremony now, but you have to get the key, you have to undo the gate, you have to do, and you certainly aren't allowed to carve your own petroglyph into the rock. So in the book, there's this elder character who sneaks back and who is having this relationship anyway, in spite of all of this. And what they end up carving is the chemical symbol for what tarps are made out of. So it's sort of gesturing towards this idea that plastic has become, there's a couple of places in the book where plastic has become so ubiquitous in the world right now, in terms of polluting our oceans, in terms of the microplastics in the Great Lakes. There's some pretty horrible environmental toxicity problems with plastic, and so they carve that on the petroglyphs as a recognition of where sort of we are right now, and how dominant plastics have become in the world. At the same time, this is complicated by the fact that tarps are being used by a lot of the characters, a lot of our people, in a lot of awesome ways, because tarps are incredibly useful if you're living on the streets, if you're camping, if you're living on the land, they're cheap. And indigenous people always have a lot of tarps. And so I wanted to sort of complicate that use of tarp with this deeper recognition that this is a practice that even if we all stopped using tarps, it's not going to solve sort of the issue that the world has with plastics and plastic pollution right now. But there is an issue with this production of plastics, and so I hope that my hope would be that in the future, these characters in the world of Nopamine, the characters would look back at the petroglyphs and be like, oh, that was that time where we almost lost ourselves because of that chemical, because of that man-made plastic. And that was a turning point.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's...
I hope you're right. Can you read for us again?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm going to ask people to open up the questions and answer period after this.
Okay. Sabe is sitting on their porch watching the birds at the feeder. There is a baby grackle yelling at its parent because it wants birdseed. The parent grackle is hurrying up to the feeder. They get the seeds, chew the seeds, and put them in baby's mouth. Over and over. Baby grackle just yells at parent grackle. The tenderness is gone. Only relentless irritation remains. And staying becomes another word for love. Sabe is thinking about this in the context of their own life and then projecting their ideas onto the grackles. The parenting of humans is relentless. The continuous infusion of unconditional love, the patience in the face of the same mistakes over and over, the patience with the constant need for attention, the narcissism. It's why they retreat here to the bush, to the cabin with the bird feeders and the endless supply of seed. The humans think they are off doing something important, and they are, just not in the way that would satisfy human expectations. Things seem pretty messed up for the humans, to be honest. The white ones, who think they are the only ones, have really structured the messed upness in a seemingly impenetrable way this time. A few good ones get their footing, and then without continual cheerleading, succumb to the shit talk. It is difficult to know where to intervene or how to start. There are embers, but the wood is always wet, and the flames go out so damn easy. Everyone thinks the ancestors have all the answers, but sometimes, most times, it takes more. Sabe keeps their special things in red cloth, safety pin to their undershirt, a tiny piece of flat cedar, a single strand of sweetgrass, a pinch of tobacco.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite. The grackle. The grackle was one of my favorite.
Oh, good.
It brought me to tears. Yeah, it just brought me to tears. Being a parent is loving, and being there unconditionally is tough.
Extraordinarily difficult.
During this time of COVID, I don't know. It moved something in me. So I'm glad you shared that one, that piece. I wanted to. I'm not a literary scholar by any means, but I'm curious about your response to Susanna Moody's Roughing It in the Bush. I noticed that she's absent from the book, but you also present the piece as a response to that. And so, can you talk to us about who she is and how you were approaching that?
Well, she is absent from the book, and that's the cure. I live in Peterborough. My community is Alderville First Nation. Susanna Moody is, for those who are also not lit scholars like me, and I am not. Susanna Moody is a white woman who was a settler in the mid 1800s, and she moved into my territory as part of the colonization and settlement. And she wrote a book called Roughing It in the Bush that was published in England and published in Canada. And now it's part of the literary canon. It's an important book because it's the first book written by a white woman. And we don't have very many perspectives of women in the 1800s in Canada. And it's also very, very racist and very anti-Black. And it presents Mississauga Anishinaabeg or Michifagik Anishinaabeg. It presents my people in a very horrible light. The descriptions are terrible. She lays bare the white supremacy of the time that isn't different, I don't think, than the white supremacy that we have right now. And so I wanted to sort of use that as a jumping off point. She came into my territory and brought this white supremacy that made her not be able to see Anishinaabe people as humans, as brilliant, as joyful, as world builders. So all of the worlds in my book, she couldn't see because of white supremacy. And so I've critiqued her work a little bit, and as we have always done in my other work, but I wanted to just use her work, use the idea of roughing it in the bush to jump out and create a different world, because that's what Anishinaabe people have been doing anyway. That's how we survived what Susanna Moody brought to my territory. And Nopaming means in the bush. So that's really the connection is in the title. And the rest of it is what she missed.
Love it. Talk to us a bit about language. You use it a lot. I noticed, and you talked about this too. Like you've talked about this before, where you don't italicize and you don't translate. You know, in the paragraph, in the parentheses beside the word. You know, doing all of that labor for us. I found myself honestly having to go to the online dictionary, in some cases. I recognized some of the words and I was like, oh, that's familiar, but I didn't always know it. And I had to do a little bit more work to do that, which was actually good for me. And I just wondered if, I imagine that's deliberate. Did you want to do it more? Did you want to do it like, how do you do that with the editor? Do you get some pushback on the editing side?
I mean, I've always had a little bit of pushback with editors, and I've always convinced them that this is really important. I think like 20 years ago when I started writing, the pushback was, I don't want the words were translated, but they weren't italicized. Now it's pretty easy to get Indigenous languages not italicized, so they're not othered. It's more difficult to get them not translated, but it's not impossible. So I'm always very strong about that, because again, I want the experience for the Anishinaabe people. I don't want that translation there. So if they know the words, most of us, I'm not a fluent speaker. I'm a language learner. I'm not a language expert. And so I think most Anishinaabe people my age and younger, particularly in the South, are in the same boat. And so we're trying to learn our language. It's difficult. We don't have time. There's tons of barriers, some of them stemming from things like residential school and shame and emotional, and others more structural. And so using language in my work forces me to learn the language, forces me to use it. It forces every single time I go to a literary festival, it forces a few more people to learn the pronunciations, learn the words. It brings in that Indigenous audience. So the Anishinaabe people can see themselves in the book. But also I think people who are Indigenous but not Anishinaabe get that, like, oh yeah, language is really important. In this book, the Ojibwe People's Online Dictionary which is a fantastic project. Pretty much all the words you can Google in that, and you will find them in that dictionary online. So it doesn't make the book less accessible, but you're right, there is more work on the part of the reader if they're not sure of the language. And then I think words like Mindemoyan, there will be people that know that word as meaning old woman. There will be people that are able to split that word up and know, as Brenda Childs writes in her work, that it means the one who holds everything together. And so there's sort of those deeper conceptual and poetic meanings that still exist in our oral tradition and still exist in our intellectual traditions that maybe not everyone gets, and that's okay. The story still works without that bigger understanding.
That word Mindemoya, my partner and I, we have a little piece of land on Lake Mindemoya in Chiging, close to Chiging. So yeah,
nice.
I did know that it meant old woman, but now this new meaning, it's beautiful. I'm telling you, this was meant to be for me to introduce you. I'm so happy about this. Can you talk to us more about Adik? Now, for me, I was really interested because my children are of the caribou clan. My partner, my husband, is of the caribou clan. And as soon as you wrote about the image of hearing the sound of herds of caribou, traversing the land, for me, I've felt that rhythm before, and it was really compelling. I wanted to sit with that more. I wanted to hear more, because we know that those relatives used to travel further down this way, but they don't anymore because of whatever. I don't even really know why exactly. Yeah, so that hunger that you talked about, that aching for, what it must have been like before, that connection, I guess.
So part of my professional life, I spend a lot of time in the north, and I work in Denendeh with Dene people, and caribou is very, very important to them. They still harvest caribou. They have close relationships. And probably 7 or 8 years ago, I tasted caribou for the first time. I came back home. I was visiting with Doug, and I was telling him about how amazing caribou was, and he said, "Oh yeah, we used to have caribou around here, like a bush caribou, so kind of a different species." But it then dawned on me that I know I have friends that are part of the caribou clan as part of an Anishinaabe clan system, and I thought about, there's a tremendous loss when you lose a species, and there has been a tremendous loss of species on the North Shore of Lake Ontario since the beginning of colonialism. The salmon, the eels, the passenger pigeon, the caribou. There's a number of worlds that have been ended. And so I wanted to kind of explore, what does it mean to have a relationship with a species that's no longer present here, through no fault of their own, who has sort of relatives here in terms of deer and moose. What is it like to be caribou clan in Michisagi, Nishnawek, where there are no caribou? And so I used some of the art of Janine Freena Jutli, who's a Gwich'in artist who had an exhibition a few years ago in Peterborough. I used some of her work. I used sort of the sounds of those big caribou herds in the north to try to figure out, to try to answer that question. And then if you think in a spiritual sense, the caribou are still here. We still have caribou clan people. There are still stories. There are still songs. There's still a presence. So I wanted to amplify that a little bit. And again, just point to this idea that there's a lot of species that I share time and space with that have already experienced, the apocalypse and have already experienced extermination. So, how do you still have a relationship with that?
Let's talk about boujee a little bit. She came in towards the end of the book. Um, where were you going with that one?
I think one of the experiences of being Anishinaabe in the city or being Indigenous in the city is that, or at least one of my experiences, is that you're constantly searching for connection. And it's difficult because you're surrounded by concrete and you're usually far from home and you don't always have access to a backyard. So boujee is a character that's looking for that belonging and looking for that connection, and is making things in the backyard to try to have that connection. And the other animals and living things that they are sharing time and space with are having none of it. They're also asserting themselves, and so it becomes kind of a satirical and humorous look at dispossession and how to reattach ourselves to the land and to each other and to the non-human beings that we share our cities with.
Okay, we've got a question coming from our cyber audience from Lori. So it says, Miigwech for writing such a beautiful and challenging book. Water plays a big role in this book. I'm particularly interested in what water teaches us about individualism versus connectedness. I love how you write about snowflakes being 10 quintillion molecules of water with such beautiful tendency to stick together. I wonder how the water and ice escaping Mashkawenji fits with this theme, or how we can relate to water as kin. Is the body of water one or many?
I think the body of water is one and many, and I think that that's what I learned from water, is how to be an individual, how to be individually self-determining in a communal setting, in a relational setting, in a setting where I have responsibilities to all kinds of different living things around me. And so in the book, I liked to kind of explore what it means to be kind of a single drop of water, what happens when you amass into a snowflake, what happens when snowflakes amass, what happens when you then drink that snowflake and, new life is born in that water as the first environment. So I think water is something that connects us in all kinds of different ways internationally. It's also something that transforms and changes forms. And I don't like change and transformation. It's stressful. It's anxiety producing. But water is constantly throughout the year melting, freezing, evaporating, coming back. It's an ultimate cycle. And so I thought there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of meaning there. There's a lot of metaphors there. There's a lot of things to think about, and a lot of practices to embody. And of course, Anishinaabe women have been walking around lakes and taking that responsibility for water for a very, very long time. And I wanted to kind of expand that understanding of water. That's an awesome question.
From Vanessa Ottman Smith. Hi, Vanessa. I know Vanessa. Nice to see you on here. Does writing pieces like this help you to think through your own logical place in the world and spaces of belonging?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I want to live inside of Nopaming. I loved writing it. It was a solace for me. I was very sad when the book was done, and I didn't. The process of writing it just brought me so much peace and calm and joy. And so I think that that's very true, that when you're making something, you learn a lot about yourself and your relationship to the world. I think I'm still learning from the book as I perform different pieces, and as I interact with people, and as the book sort of travels through the world, travels through the seasons.
Okay, one more question here. Atu Mamat, thank you so much for gifting us with your time today. Could you share your thoughts on what Anishinaabeg oral tradition can teach us all on developing more ethical ways of producing knowledge in fictional literature and beyond?
I think that one of the things I'm thinking about right now is one of the things I'm missing in my life is standing in a room or gathering around a fire or sitting around a picnic table with a group of Anishinaabe people, for to kind of relate to each other, to have an embodied experience, to harvest sap or to process rice or to feast together. Those embodied experiences are missing right now. We're having a very disembodied experience of life right now because of the pandemic. And so I'm thinking very much about the importance of oral storytelling, of the fleeting nature of it, of the informal nature of it. It's not very often our elders will be like, gather around, I'm going to tell you a story and it's going to blow your mind. It's more often sort of, you don't even know it's happened until it's done. And you're like, whoa, you just mic dropped a huge story there, kind of really quietly in the corner. And it's about relationships, and it's about standing in the same room with the same family and the same community over several generations and figuring out how to connect to your ancestors and connect to the future through sound and embodiment. And so all of that is really missing in my life right now. Not completely missing, but I'm really missing that. And I think that that's an important, I think that that's really, really important in terms of building societies, in terms of mental health, in terms of shared understandings, in terms of care for each other. And I think that that's the context that the oral tradition exists in. It exists in a context of diversity. We never have just one written version of the story. There's thousands of versions of the story. The stories shift based on the audience and the relationships and the seasons. So it's almost like the oral tradition takes place in the context of consent and diversity and respect and humility. And I think all of those are big practices for the modern world.
Thank you. The sun, Mishomis, is just coming into this room like so hard right now. Can't even barely see you. One and many. I really love that. That's going to be my takeaway today. We are one and many. Why do we foreclose that? Like, why is it this or this? Why can't it be both? And that being individual and the collective, that was really profound. I really thank whoever asked that question and for your answer. I want to thank you, Leanne, for your time, for your courageousness to put this out there, to share it. It is such a gift. I read a lot of your stuff to my kids. The Gift is in the Making. That book is like a household favorite. And this, I think, is going to be one too. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for everything, for your brilliance, for your truth.
Thank you so much for your kind words and for that deep engagement, deep dive into Nopaming and my work, and for sharing your Saturday afternoon with me. Thanks to your kids for sharing their parent with us all too. That's a big deal on a Saturday.
That's true. That's true. Good. I wish you and your family well as well.
Yeah.
I know you have children as well, so it's good to be with you. And I hope one day we can meet in person.
Oh yeah, me too.
To do that yet.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay. Thanks. Bye now.
Bye.